Hello, friends. Why did medieval healers mix bitter herbs and whisper incantations to fight insomnia? How could bloodletting become a remedy for nightmares, and wine a sedative for a restless soul? Why did peasants fear the night, when demons and witches were believed to steal their sleep? Today, we'll dive into the dark, mysterious world of medieval Europe, a place where sleep was a luxury, and every night was a trial. Welcome to Sleepless Simpleton, where we'll uncover the secrets of battling sleep in an age of superstition and fear. Before we begin, give this video a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And drop a comment to share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from different corners of the world. So dim the lights, let your worries fade, and get ready. Let's begin. Sleep, for many in medieval times, was a fleeting luxury, something that could be as elusive as the comfort of a warm bed in a drafty stone house. When insomnia struck, it was not just a biological ailment. It was a spiritual affliction, a sign that something was amiss in the very soul of the sleeper. Dreams, too, were fraught with meaning. Nightmares were not merely unpleasant dreams. They were viewed as ominous, even dangerous, signs of a person's spiritual turmoil or demonic influence. Healers, monks, and wise women of the time approached the treatment of insomnia and nightmares with a mixture of superstition, herbal knowledge, and religious fervor. Sleep remedies were often concocted from the earth's most potent plants, each one holding its own mystical properties. Herbs like valerian and poppy were used in teas and potions, believed to calm the restless mind and induce sleep. Yet the power of these plants wasn't only in their chemistry. It was in the belief that they could influence the very spirit of the person who drank them. You can almost imagine yourself in a small medieval apothecary, surrounded by shelves of dried herbs, the air thick with the scent of lavender, sage, and the faintest trace of smoke from the hearth. The healer, a woman with hands calloused from years of preparation, prepares a mixture to soothe your troubled sleep. She tells you that this remedy has been passed down for generations, that it will draw the spirits of unrest away from you, allowing your mind to rest. But there were other remedies, too. In many villages, prayers and charms were used as often as the herbs. It was believed that the demonic forces causing sleeplessness could be warded off with the right incantations. A piece of parchment with a carefully written prayer or a talisman of religious significance was sometimes placed under the pillow to guard against the night's terrors. In some ways, these remedies were both comforting and terrifying. Comforting in the belief that they could offer protection, but terrifying in the sense that they were based on a fear of the unseen. A fear that the spirits of the night might be more powerful than the simple healing herbs and charms offered. Imagine yourself in the quiet darkness, listening to the distant chanting of a priest, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition as he invokes protection over you. This blending of hope and fear, of herbal remedies and divine intervention, paints a picture of a time when sleep was not simply a matter of rest. It was a battleground between the known and the unknown, where every toss and turn in the night might signal a deeper, more spiritual struggle. As you lay in the stillness, remember that these ancient practices, though strange to us now, were born from a very real human need for comfort, security, and the hope for peace in the quiet hours of the night. The rhythm of their lives was shaped by forces beyond their control, much like the restless nights of today. In medieval times, sleep was not merely a physiological need, as it is often seen today. It was deeply entwined with spirituality, morality, and the unseen forces that governed life. Sleep, or the lack of it, was frequently understood as a reflection of one's spiritual state. For many, a sleepless night was not just a personal struggle, but a sign that something was gravely wrong with the soul. It was said that a sleepless mind might be suffering the consequences of sin, or worse, the influence of demonic forces, and this belief permeated every aspect of medieval life. Imagine yourself in a small, darkened church, the air thick with incense, the only light coming from flickering candles. The priest stands before you, reading from the scriptures, his voice heavy with the weight of the ancient words. His sermon today is on the dangers of sleeplessness and its spiritual consequences. "The Lord has granted you rest, but your sin has taken it away," he intones. "Repent, and you shall find peace in the quiet of the night." The idea that insomnia was a sign of guilt or divine punishment was deeply ingrained in medieval thought. In a world where religion and superstition ruled, the mind's struggles were not only attributed to the body but to one's relationship with God. Clergy often preached that if a person could not sleep, it was because they had not repented for their sins or had angered God in some way. The inability to rest became a form of spiritual unrest, an affliction of the soul that required not just physical remedies but moral correction. Sleep was also understood as a gift, a divine gift granted to those who were righteous. In fact, the very concept of sleep was often intertwined with the idea of salvation. To sleep well was to be at peace with God, to be free from the burdens of sin, guilt, or evil forces. Therefore, the process of falling asleep was seen as a kind of spiritual surrender. To fall into a deep, restful sleep was akin to surrendering one's soul to the divine, trusting that the hands of God would watch over them throughout the night. But what happened when that peace was denied? When sleep became a battleground of restless tossing and turning, the result of an unsettled conscience or a wicked spirit? The inability to rest became more than just a physical discomfort, it was a failure of the spirit. The person struggling to sleep might seek the help of a priest or healer, not only for physical remedies but for guidance on how to restore peace within their soul. For many, this battle against insomnia was a deeply personal one. The individual would often turn inward, seeking the cause of their restlessness. Had they wronged someone? Was there a hidden sin they had not confessed? The medieval mind was deeply introspective, constantly searching for meaning in every action, every feeling, every sleepless night. The experience of insomnia was not just about tiredness. It was a crisis of conscience. Imagine now a small village at dusk. The sun has set, and the first stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. Inside a humble cottage, a woman lies awake in her bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The room is silent, save for the occasional rustling of the wind outside. She has been awake for hours, her mind racing. She knows her body is exhausted, yet sleep eludes her. A sense of dread fills her, as she wonders if her sleeplessness is a sign of something more troubling. Did she offend God? Did she fail in her duties as a mother, a wife, a member of the community? She whispers a prayer, asking for forgiveness, hoping that the act of contrition will bring her peace. Perhaps, like so many others before her, she seeks solace not only in divine intervention but in the hope that, with repentance, her troubled mind will finally find rest. The ritual of prayer becomes as much a part of the cure as the healing herbs that might be brewed or the amulets placed beneath her pillow. In these moments, sleep becomes more than just rest, it is a process of spiritual reconciliation. The very act of surrendering to sleep, letting go of the burdens of the day, becomes a symbol of redemption. For those who struggled with their faith or feared they had strayed too far from the path, sleep could be a reminder of their separation from the divine. A night spent tossing and turning could be seen as a divine judgment, an indication that the person had failed to attain the peace promised to the righteous. But for the more fortunate, sleep was a blessing, a refuge from the stresses of daily life, and the hope that tomorrow would bring a fresh start. A good night's sleep was believed to restore the soul as much as the body. It was an opportunity to heal, to reset, to be reborn in a sense. The pressure to be at peace with both God and oneself was intense, and it shaped the way people approached sleep. Sleeplessness was not only a matter of health but of morality. The fear of sin, of divine punishment, and of spiritual unrest was so profound that it cast a shadow over the simple act of sleeping. The struggle for sleep was a struggle for peace, both spiritual and physical. For many, the pressure was overwhelming. The fear of divine wrath, the anxiety about their standing in the eyes of God, and the overwhelming guilt for even the smallest transgressions weighed heavily. Insomnia was a reminder of the fragility of the human soul, and every night spent awake was a small reminder of the eternal struggle for grace. And so, medieval healers, whether they were priests, wise women, or apothecaries, found themselves not just addressing the physical symptoms of sleeplessness but the spiritual struggles that came with it. They were not only prescribing potions, teas, and herbs, but also offering a form of spiritual guidance, trying to ease the mind as much as the body. In this way, the struggle for sleep was also the struggle for salvation. It was a constant balancing act between the world of the physical and the world of the divine. For those who found themselves awake in the stillness of the night, it was not just a matter of tossing and turning, it was a search for meaning, for redemption, for peace. As the night grows darker, the world of the medieval mind becomes a place of contemplation and quiet fear. Sleep, that simple human need, becomes a reflection of the soul's state, a battleground between rest and unrest, between peace and guilt, between the mortal and the divine. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon in medieval times, casting long shadows over villages and towns, the people who found themselves struggling with sleeplessness often turned to the remedies that nature offered. In a world where medical knowledge was rudimentary at best, and where divine intervention was sometimes the last recourse, herbs were seen as powerful allies in the battle for rest. These herbal brews, concoctions brewed from the plants of the earth, held promises of sleep and relief, but often delivered an experience more bitter than sweet. Imagine yourself in the quiet of a medieval apothecary's shop, a space dimly lit by the flickering flame of a hearth. The air is thick with the scent of dried flowers, roots, and leaves, lavender, valerian, and chamomile hanging in bundles from the rafters. A single wooden counter sits in the center of the room, where jars of herbs are carefully labeled, each promising to ease your troubled mind and grant the solace of sleep. The apothecary, an older man with a long, white beard and a weathered face, moves slowly among the shelves, selecting the ingredients for your brew. You approach the counter, and he gestures for you to sit. "Valerian root," he says, picking up a small jar, "is a favorite among those with restless hearts and minds. Steeped in hot water, it will calm you." His hands, steady with years of experience, measure the root with care, placing it into a pot. Next, he reaches for chamomile flowers, soft, delicate blossoms that promise comfort and rest. "Chamomile will soothe your spirit and settle your body," he adds, a note of reassurance in his voice. He carefully pours boiling water over the mixture, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. The scent is earthy, sweet, and calming, and you are almost lulled into a sense of peacefulness, as though the remedy is already working its magic. But as the brew begins to cool and the color darkens, you are reminded that medieval remedies were not always the comforting potions of fairy tales. They could be bitter, unpredictable, and sometimes even dangerous. As you take the first sip, you notice the taste is far from pleasant. Valerian, known for its strong, pungent aroma, fills your mouth with a bitterness that makes your stomach turn. The chamomile provides a lightness, but it does little to mask the overpowering flavor of the root. You wonder how many others, in their desperation for rest, have bravely swallowed such concoctions, hoping for the peace of sleep but finding only discomfort. The medieval approach to sleep was grounded in the belief that the right combination of herbs and plants could not only induce slumber but also restore balance to the body and soul. In an age when the understanding of the body's inner workings was rudimentary, the idea of balancing humors, was central to many treatments. This was a belief that the body was made up of four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that illness and discomfort were caused by an imbalance of these humors. Insomnia, it was believed, was caused by a disturbance in the humors, and the right herbs could restore harmony. Valerian, with its calming effects, was one of the most commonly used herbs for insomnia. It was believed to soothe the nervous system and promote relaxation, a remedy for the restless mind that could not shut off at night. However, despite its effectiveness in helping some individuals sleep, valerian's potent scent and bitter taste often made it a difficult remedy to stomach. And for many, its effects were not always consistent. Some found it to be a reliable sleep aid, while others found no relief at all, or even experienced disturbing dreams or unsettling side effects. Then there was the poppy, another powerful sleep remedy. The opium poppy was revered in medieval times for its ability to induce deep sleep and relieve pain. Its use was widespread, from soothing the pain of injuries to providing respite for the sleepless. But the very same properties that made the poppy such an effective remedy also made it dangerous. Poppy-based concoctions were often mixed into strong alesh or even syrups, and their sedative effects could be so potent that they risked causing dependency or overdose. A gentle lull into sleep could easily turn into a dangerous stupor, as many unwittingly cross the fine line between remedy and harm. Imagine yourself now in a small medieval cottage, where a mother prepares a poppy-based syrup for her child, whose restless nights have left the family exhausted. She carefully measures the syrup, diluting it with a bit of honey, hoping the child will sleep soundly. But as the child falls asleep, the mother cannot help but worry. She knows that such remedies can be dangerous in excess, and the fear of overdose is never far from her mind. The line between healing and harm was often perilously thin. For those who could not afford such costly brews, simpler herbal remedies like chamomile and lavender were often used to calm the mind and promote sleep. These herbs were more accessible and had fewer risks, but their effects were often less dramatic. Chamomile, with its light, floral scent, was known to soothe the nerves and ease the tension that kept people awake. Lavender, with its calming properties, was often placed under pillows or used in sachets to promote restful sleep. These remedies, while not as powerful as valerian or poppy, offered a gentler form of relief, one that did not carry the same risks. Yet even these seemingly harmless herbs were not without their complications. Chamomile, while soothing, could sometimes cause allergic reactions in those who were sensitive to it. Lavender, with its calming scent, could sometimes trigger headaches or dizziness in people who were particularly sensitive to strong odors. In a time when medical knowledge was still primitive, these herbs, despite their natural origins, were not always as safe as they seemed. In many ways, the medieval approach to treating insomnia and nightmares with herbal brews reflects the hope, but also the uncertainty, that surrounded healing in this period. The remedies were born from the knowledge passed down through generations, based on trial and error, and the belief that nature held the key to peace. But these brews, while effective for some, often left much to be desired for others. The effects could be fleeting, the taste unbearable, and the risks high. And yet, for those who were desperate for rest, these bitter concoctions were sometimes the only solution available. As the night stretches on, the apothecary's brew begins to take hold. The warmth of the liquid seeps into your body, and the faintest drowsiness begins to settle over you. You feel the pull of sleep, gentle and inviting, though the taste of the brew lingers in your mouth, reminding you of the strange and bitter remedies of a time long past. And as the weight of the night settles over you, you realize that these ancient remedies, though imperfect, were a reflection of the people who used them, a people who sought rest not just for the body, but for the soul. The rituals surrounding sleep, the herbs, and the prayers were part of a larger search for peace in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. The human body in medieval times was not understood as a system of interconnected organs and processes in the way we think of it today. Instead, it was governed by the theory of humors, four essential bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, balance, and even sleep were believed to be determined by the harmony of these humors. The body, when out of balance, could manifest various disorders, and insomnia was no exception. For those whose sleep eluded them, one common remedy was a practice that might seem shocking to us today: bloodletting. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with the scent of herbs and antiseptic smoke. A medieval physician, his robe slightly stained with past remedies, stands over you, a lancet in hand. The physician is calm, methodical, and as he prepares to perform the procedure, you can feel a strange mixture of fear and trust. Bloodletting, though painful, was considered an effective means of restoring balance to the body, and it was frequently used to treat a wide range of ailments, including sleeplessness. In medieval Europe, the balance of humors was thought to be the key to good health. When one humor became too dominant, the body would fall into a state of imbalance, and illness would follow. For those suffering from insomnia, it was believed that an excess of blood might be contributing to their restless nights. Bloodletting was seen as a way to reduce the flow of this excess humor, bringing the body back into a state of equilibrium. It was a ritual, a procedure performed by skilled practitioners, who used various tools, leeching, cupping, or a simple lancet, to draw blood from their patients. The practice of bloodletting was rooted in ancient Greek medicine, particularly the teachings of Hippocrates, who believed that the balance of humors controlled health. His ideas were further refined by physicians in the medieval period, and they came to dominate European medical practices for centuries. Bloodletting became a cornerstone of treatment for many ailments, and insomnia was no exception. The idea was that by removing a small amount of blood, the body's internal balance could be restored, thus alleviating the cause of the sleeplessness. For a person suffering from insomnia, the bloodletting procedure might begin with the physician assessing the patient's condition. Was there an excess of blood, they would ask, or an imbalance of humors that needed correcting? Once this diagnosis was made, the patient might be laid on a table, and a vein would be selected to draw blood from. The physician would use a sharp lancet to open the vein, allowing the blood to flow into a basin or jar. In some cases, the process was performed with leeches, whose natural ability to draw blood was thought to be more gentle than the use of a lancet. As the blood slowly dripped from the body, the person undergoing the procedure might experience a strange mix of sensations. There would be the immediate discomfort of the incision, the slight sting as the blood was drawn, followed by a feeling of lightness as the blood left the body. Some believed that this lightheaded sensation was a sign of the body's healing process, a release of excess that would allow the patient to rest more easily. The bloodletting procedure could last anywhere from a few minutes to much longer, depending on the severity of the symptoms and the physician's diagnosis. Though the practice of bloodletting was intended to help with insomnia, the results were often unpredictable. Some patients reported feeling a sense of calm, a relief from the tension that had kept them awake. The reduction in blood might, in theory, lessen the pressure on the body, helping the mind to relax and slip into a peaceful sleep. For others, however, the effects were less than helpful. The loss of blood often left the patient feeling weak or faint, and the ensuing recovery period could be long and difficult. For some, the procedure only exacerbated their fatigue, making sleep even more elusive. It was a gamble, one that often left the person suffering from sleeplessness wondering whether their trust in the physician had been well placed. Even more troubling was the fact that bloodletting was not always performed with the hygiene and care that we would expect today. In an era where the understanding of bacteria and infection was non-existent, bloodletting could lead to serious complications, including infections, excessive bleeding, and in some cases, death. While medieval healers may have been skilled in their practices, they were often working with limited knowledge, and their reliance on the balance of humors as the explanation for all physical ailments sometimes led to treatments that did more harm than good. In the case of insomnia, bloodletting was often just one of many treatments prescribed. A healer might combine the bloodletting procedure with other remedies, such as herbal brews, charms, or prayers, hoping that the combination would restore the proper balance and bring about a restful night's sleep. However, the idea that a single physical remedy could address the complex and multifaceted issue of sleeplessness was flawed, and for many, the results were less than satisfactory. Picture a family gathered around their hearth, the warmth of the fire offering a small comfort as they discuss the insomnia that has plagued their loved one for weeks. The mother has sought out the local healer, who has recommended bloodletting as a way to cure the restless nights. The family watches nervously as the healer prepares the lancet, hoping that the procedure will provide the relief they so desperately need. As the blood is drawn, there is a collective sense of anxiety. Will this be the answer to their prayers, or will it leave the person weaker, more exhausted, and more vulnerable to illness? Bloodletting, in all its mystery and pain, was one of the most enduring treatments of medieval medicine. For some, it provided relief, a brief respite from the mind's restless churnings, while for others, it was a painful reminder of how much was still unknown about the body and the mind. What medieval healers understood as an imbalance of humors, we now recognize as a much more complex interplay of physical, mental, and emotional factors. And yet, despite the sometimes harmful and ineffective nature of bloodletting, it continued to be used for centuries, a testament to the persistence of medieval medical practices and their reliance on the ancient theories of the body. As you drift deeper into the night, consider the many ways in which history has sought to understand the human condition, from the mystery of sleep to the healing practices that have shaped our modern understanding of medicine. And though the methods of the past may seem strange and even dangerous today, they were a reflection of humanity's deep desire to understand itself, to heal, to rest, and to find peace. In the medieval world, where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were blurred, the quest for sleep often extended beyond the realm of physical remedies. For many, the struggle to sleep was deeply intertwined with beliefs in the unseen forces that governed daily life, forces that could bring peace, but also cause chaos. Sleep was not simply a time for rest, but a vulnerable state, where the spirit could be attacked by demons, evil spirits, or even cursed by an unrepentant soul. To protect oneself from these unseen threats, many turned to magical practices, charms, amulets, and rituals designed to ward off the dark forces that were thought to plague their nights. Imagine yourself in a medieval home, dimly lit by a single candle. The air is thick with the scent of burning incense and the sound of distant whispers. A woman, perhaps a mother or a wife, gathers around her family, preparing for the night. The children are tucked into bed, their heads resting on straw-stuffed mattresses, while the adults say their final prayers. But before they lie down to sleep, the woman takes one last step. She reaches into a small wooden box, hidden beneath her bed, and pulls out a small, intricately carved amulet. It is made of stone, with an image of a saint or an angel engraved on it. She holds it in her hand for a moment, muttering a prayer under her breath, before slipping it beneath her pillow. It is believed that this charm will protect her from the night's dangers, whether they be nightmares, restless sleep, or even the evil spirits that lurk in the darkness. Charms and amulets were a common fixture in medieval homes, used not only to promote sleep but to protect the sleeper from the unseen forces of evil. These objects were thought to carry protective powers, often infused with religious significance, or magical properties. Christian symbols, like crosses or images of saints, were frequently used in these talismans, as they were believed to offer divine protection. But many amulets also blended Christian and pagan traditions, creating a complex mixture of beliefs that spanned across cultures and religions. Some charms were created with simple, natural materials such as stone, wood, or bone. Others were crafted with more elaborate and costly materials, like silver, gold, or precious stones, and were often worn around the neck or placed under the pillow. It was believed that these objects had the power to ward off evil spirits, demons, and even witches who might try to disturb the sleeper's peace. The use of charms was not limited to the wealthy. Common folk also relied on these protective objects, often creating their own charms or purchasing them from local healers. For those who could not afford amulets made of precious metals, simpler charms were just as effective. A small bundle of herbs, lavender, rosemary, or sage, could be tied together and hung above the bed. These herbs were thought to purify the air and promote peaceful sleep. It was common to see these small bundles of herbs placed in bedrooms or near windows, believed to keep harmful spirits at bay and to promote restfulness. In some areas, people would even use symbols of protection, like the hand of Fatima, or a simple knot, as a way of guarding their sleep from malevolent forces. Beyond the physical charms, superstitious rituals were often employed to ensure a restful night. These rituals, passed down through generations, were meant to invoke divine protection or to cleanse the sleeper's spirit. One common ritual involved placing a small piece of paper with a written prayer or incantation beneath the pillow. The prayer, often a plea for protection or guidance, was believed to create a barrier between the sleeper and any dark forces that might seek to cause harm. For those suffering from nightmares or restless sleep, these rituals were believed to have the power to soothe the mind and restore peace. In some medieval communities, it was also common for people to perform a kind of sleep exorcism before bed. A healer or priest would be called upon to bless the home, the bed, and the people in it. The exorcist would recite prayers and blessings, invoking the protection of saints or angels to guard against nightmares and other disturbances. This practice was particularly common among those who had experienced recurring nightmares or who felt that their sleep was being disturbed by an unseen force. These blessings, often said with a sense of ritual solemnity, were intended to create a sacred space for rest, one that would be free from the negative energy of the outside world. In other cases, people might resort to more elaborate rituals. A common practice involved the use of a night watchman, a person who would sit by the bed of a person struggling with sleeplessness, offering protection through prayer or chanting. The watchman's role was to keep evil spirits at bay, ensuring that the sleeper remained undisturbed throughout the night. In some instances, the watchman would even recite specific prayers or songs designed to lull the sleeper into a peaceful state. These rituals, while offering comfort to those who believed in their power, also served as a reminder of the constant battle against the dark forces that lurk just beyond the veil of sleep. The belief in the power of charms, amulets, and rituals was not confined to the lower classes or to isolated villages. Even among the nobility, these practices held sway. Wealthy families would often commission intricate, gold-plated amulets adorned with jewels or religious symbols. These amulets were worn as necklaces, carried as pocket tokens, or placed under the pillow as a form of protection. The use of such objects was not seen as a mere superstition. It was a serious and accepted part of medieval life, woven into the very fabric of daily existence. For those living in the shadow of superstition, charms and rituals were not just an option, they were essential. A restless night could be seen as a personal failing, a sign that one's spiritual protection had been compromised. A charm or ritual, however, offered a sense of control over an otherwise uncontrollable situation. The amulets and prayers provided a tangible form of reassurance, a physical manifestation of protection in a world filled with uncertainty and fear. As the night deepens, and the flickering candlelight casts long shadows on the walls, the sleep-deprived may find comfort in these rituals, however strange they may seem today. The quiet hum of whispered prayers and the weight of an amulet beneath the pillow represent not just a quest for rest but a deeper search for peace, safety, and a shield from the unseen dangers of the night. In this world, sleep was never simply a physical act. It was a spiritual journey, one that required constant vigilance, belief, and protection. And so, with the help of charms, amulets, and rituals, medieval people sought not only to sleep but to protect themselves from the very forces that threatened to disturb their rest. In the medieval period, the quiet hours of the night were not just the time for sleep, they were a realm of unseen horrors, where the boundaries between the waking world and the supernatural were thin, and where terrifying creatures could slip through. For those struggling with insomnia or restless sleep, one of the greatest fears was the presence of night hags, sleep demons, and other malevolent entities that were believed to torment the mind and spirit during the hours of darkness. These dark forces were not mere superstition, they were thought to be real, and their effects were deeply felt by those who encountered them. Imagine yourself in the stillness of a medieval night, the air cool and thick with the scent of damp earth. The village has quieted down, and the only sounds are the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of an owl. Inside your cottage, the fire has died down, and you are lying in bed, trying to drift off to sleep. But tonight something is different. A strange unease fills the air, as though something unseen is watching you. Your eyelids grow heavy, but just as you are about to fall into slumber, a feeling of suffocation begins to creep over you. You cannot breathe, as if an invisible weight is pressing down on your chest. You are trapped, unable to move or speak, and the terror of being watched overwhelms you. This experience, the sensation of being crushed or held down in bed, was described in medieval times as the work of night hags or sleep demons, and it was believed to be the cause of many sleepless nights. The most commonly known of these entities was the nightmare, a creature that would visit people in their sleep, often while they were in the midst of a dream. The nightmare was said to sit on the chest of the sleeper, suffocating them with its weight and leaving them paralyzed with fear. Some believed that the nightmare was a physical creature, a demonic entity that could physically enter a person's room, while others saw it as a spiritual or supernatural force, a manifestation of evil that could invade the body and mind. The night hag, a female demon or spirit, was another common figure in medieval folklore. She was believed to enter the bedroom of a sleeper, often in the dead of night, and sit on their chest, pressing down with a weight so heavy that the person could not breathe. This figure was often associated with sleep paralysis, a condition where the sleeper experiences vivid hallucinations and is unable to move upon waking or falling asleep. But for those in medieval times, it was not simply a medical condition, it was a terrifying encounter with a supernatural being, a malevolent force that could enter the very sanctuary of one's dreams. In some accounts, the night hag was believed to be a witch, someone who had sold their soul to the devil in exchange for dark powers. These witches were said to be able to shape-shift into horrible, nightmarish creatures that could terrorize people in their sleep. In other instances, the night hag was seen as a vengeful spirit, a restless soul who returned from the afterlife to torment the living. Whether in the form of a creature or a spiritual entity, the night hag was a figure of pure dread, an embodiment of the fear that darkness could bring. As you lie awake, trapped in the grip of terror, you feel your body betray you. Your limbs are heavy, as if bound by invisible chains, and every effort to move or scream is thwarted by the suffocating pressure. You try to cry out for help, but your voice is lost in the silence of the night. Your mind races, but the more you struggle, the tighter the grip of fear becomes. You know that something is near, something ancient and malevolent, but you cannot see it. You can only feel it, pressing down on you, robbing you of your peace and leaving you vulnerable to its power. This experience, although often linked to sleep paralysis and psychological distress, was understood in medieval times as the work of dark, supernatural forces. The sensation of being unable to move, of being crushed by an unseen weight, was not simply the result of a physical or mental condition. It was a direct attack from a demonic entity, something to be feared, something to be guarded against. For many medieval people, this terror was very real. The fear of night hags and sleep demons was so prevalent that it became woven into the very fabric of medieval life. Healers and priests would be called upon to perform exorcisms or protective rituals to ward off these creatures. Incantations and prayers were often said before bed, invoking the protection of saints or angels to keep the night creatures at bay. Sacred symbols and religious charms were placed under pillows or hung above the bed to prevent the night hag from entering. For some, the fear of these entities was so intense that they would sleep with a candle burning beside them, or with a crucifix near their bed, hoping that the light or the divine symbol would repel the evil spirits. In some cases, people believed that these sleep demons could even enter the body of the sleeper, taking control of their mind and soul. It was thought that those who suffered from chronic nightmares or restless sleep were cursed, or worse, under the influence of a dark power. The inability to sleep became not only a physical affliction but a sign of spiritual weakness, a vulnerability that could open the door to demonic possession. To sleep soundly was a sign of divine favor, but to be plagued by nightmares or sleep paralysis was a sign that something was wrong, that the person was under spiritual attack. And so, the terror of night hags and sleep demons became a constant source of fear, one that added to the already heavy burden of sleeplessness. For medieval people, sleep was not simply a time for rest, it was a battleground between the forces of good and evil. The fear of the unseen, the fear of the creatures that might lurk in the darkness, was ever present. The struggle for sleep became a struggle for safety, for spiritual peace, and for protection from the forces that threatened to invade the sanctity of the night. As you lie there in the dark, with the shadows growing longer and the wind howling outside, the presence of the night hag seems almost tangible. You can almost hear the soft, measured steps as she draws closer, the weight of her presence growing heavier. And yet, in the stillness of the night, you remain still, hoping that the protective prayers, the charms, and the rituals will keep her at bay. Perhaps tonight you will sleep without interruption. But in the back of your mind, you know that tomorrow night may bring the same fear, the same weight pressing down upon your chest. The terror of the night hag is never fully gone, only held at bay by the fragile protections of belief and ritual. In the medieval world, where the line between the sacred and the secular was often indistinguishable, sleep was not just a personal necessity, it was an essential part of one's spiritual practice. Among the most rigid and well-documented sleep schedules were those of the monks who lived in the monasteries. Their lives were governed by the hours of prayer, contemplation, and labor, activities that left little room for rest, especially for those who struggled with insomnia or restless nights. Imagine yourself walking through the quiet, stone corridors of a medieval monastery. The walls are thick, and the air is cool with the scent of incense and stone dust. The monks are busy, their heads bent over manuscripts or their hands working the land. But as the day turns to night, the monastery begins to hum with the rhythm of sacred ritual. The bell rings, signaling the time for evening prayers, and one by one, the monks file into the chapel. There is no true rest here, only the steady beat of devotion. The monastic schedule, often referred to as the divine office, was a strict regimen of prayer and work that structured the day and night. The monks followed the hours of the day and night according to the liturgy of the hours, which divided the day into fixed prayer times: matins, midnight, lauds, dawn, terce, mid-morning, sext, midday, none, afternoon, vespers, evening, and compline, night. The night, it seemed, was no time for true rest. While the body might lie in bed, sleep was a fleeting companion to those whose lives were devoted to serving God through the rhythm of prayer. As you step further into the monastery's dormitory, you see the simple, narrow cots, each monk's bed tucked into a small alcove, separated by rough stone walls. The beds are hard, with only a thin straw mattress, and the monks wear woolen robes, even as they sleep. The night is not meant for deep rest. It is only a brief pause in the cycle of prayer and work. Each monk knows that at midnight the bell will call them to matins, the first of their nightly prayers. After this prayer, they will return to their cold beds for a few more hours of restless sleep, only to be woken again by the ringing bell for lauds, the dawn prayer, at the first light of morning. It may seem like a cruel schedule for those seeking comfort and sleep. Indeed, for many monks, the idea of a restful night's sleep was a distant dream. The rigorous schedule, intended to purify the body and soul, was designed to create discipline, but for some, it was a cause of physical exhaustion and, at times, spiritual unrest. Sleep was seen not as a luxury but as a necessity for the soul's well-being. The monks believed that their sleepless nights, their broken rest, were a form of sacrifice and devotion. Through their lack of rest, they offered their bodies as living sacrifices to God, hoping that their exhaustion would bring them closer to spiritual enlightenment. But for those with insomnia or restless sleep, the monastic schedule could be a form of torment. Imagine the frustration of lying awake in a cold, hard bed, your mind racing with thoughts of the day's work and prayers, knowing that the bell would ring again soon, summoning you to yet another prayer. Sleep became not just a physiological need but a spiritual burden, a test of faith. The monks did not lie down to sleep simply to rest their bodies. They lay down with the hope that their souls would be replenished, but the constant interruption of their sleep often left them exhausted and spiritually strained. Despite the exhaustion, the monks followed their strict routines with unwavering discipline. It was believed that the constant cycle of prayer, work, and rest would bring them closer to God, and that through their sacrifices, they would purify their souls. But for some, this regimen may have been torturous. The body requires sleep to heal and restore itself, but in the harsh regimen of the monastery, that healing was often neglected. In some ways, the monastic schedule reflects the medieval understanding of sleep itself. Sleep was not just a physical necessity but a spiritual discipline. It was about conquering the body's demands and offering it as a sacrifice for the greater good. The strictness of the schedule was an attempt to maintain control over the body's impulses, a way of showing that the soul could transcend the basic needs of the flesh. The monks believed that by curbing their natural desires, sleep being one of the most basic, they could align themselves more fully with divine will. But this schedule also led to certain risks. The monks' lack of rest, coupled with their rigorous duties, could result in physical and mental exhaustion. The constant cycle of interrupted sleep might cause feelings of anxiety, irritability, and an inability to focus. For some, the lack of deep sleep could also lead to hallucinatory experiences, a condition that was often interpreted as spiritual visions or encounters with divine beings. Yet, for others, the result was far less mystical. The struggle for sleep, especially in the dark hours of the night, could lead to a sense of hopelessness, as though one's devotion was not enough to conquer the natural need for rest. Imagine yourself as a young monk, new to the life of the monastery. The first few days are full of awe, the rituals, the chants, the solemn prayers. But as the nights grow colder and the bell rings relentlessly through the night, the true cost of the schedule begins to take its toll. You find yourself growing weary, your mind clouded with exhaustion. The lack of deep rest makes it hard to concentrate during the day, and your body feels heavy and uncooperative during prayers. You wonder how long you can continue this routine, and whether the sacrifices are truly worth the spiritual rewards. As the night stretches on, you realize that the sleep you so desperately need is not just a physical requirement, but a deeply spiritual longing. Sleep, in the monastic tradition, was a means of spiritual purification, a way to rest in the grace of God. But when that rest is denied, when sleep becomes elusive, the soul is left adrift. The monks who followed this strict schedule believed that through their exhaustion, they were forging a deeper connection to the divine. But for others, the reality of sleeplessness was less about spiritual transcendence and more about the simple struggle for physical and mental rest. In the medieval period, sleep was not seen as something to be enjoyed but as something to be conquered. The monks' disciplined sleep schedule reflected the broader medieval understanding of the body as a tool for spiritual growth. To rest was to surrender to the body's natural desires, but to resist that surrender was to strive for spiritual elevation. Sleep, in this context, was not just a biological need, it was a battleground, where the forces of faith and the demands of the flesh constantly clashed. As you lie in the dark of the monastery's dormitory, feeling the cold stone beneath your back and hearing the distant toll of the bell calling you to prayer, you realize that the struggle for sleep is a universal one, a struggle that transcends time, space, and belief. And perhaps, like the monks of old, you too will come to understand that rest is not just a gift of the body, but a gift of the soul. In medieval Europe, the lives of peasants were marked by a harsh and often unforgiving routine: work in the fields, tending to livestock, and the ceaseless effort to maintain the most basic necessities of life. For the peasant, sleep was not a luxury but a brief respite from a day full of labor, hardship, and uncertainty. Yet, even in the small moments of rest, there was little comfort to be found. The bed, a symbol of rest in more prosperous households, was in fact a source of discomfort for the peasants, often inadequate, shared, and unpleasant. The conditions in which they slept only served to exacerbate the struggles of those already living on the edge of survival. Imagine yourself in a small, rural cottage on a chilly medieval night. The stone walls are thick and uneven, letting in a draft that makes the air feel colder than it should be. The dim glow of a hearth provides the only warmth, its embers flickering as they burn down to a soft glow. You lie in your bed, a simple, hard frame made of rough-hewn wood, upon which rests a thin mattress filled with straw, hay, or sometimes even feathers. The mattress is lumpy, the straw sharp against your back, and no matter how you arrange yourself, there is no getting comfortable. Your body aches from a long day of labor in the fields, and though exhaustion weighs heavily on your eyelids, sleep remains distant, elusive. You share this bed with your spouse, perhaps even with children, all squeezed together in a tight space. There is little privacy, and the sounds of your family's shifting bodies and the occasional whispering of hushed conversations fill the room. The cramped conditions, the lack of space, and the persistent cold make sleep a challenge. But worse still is the knowledge that sleep, while essential for rest and recovery, is also a dangerous vulnerability. In the medieval period, the darkness of the night brought with it more than just the silence of sleep. It was a time when criminals, spirits, and illness might strike, and peasant families lived with a constant sense of unease as they settled in for the night. The bed, or rather, the lack of a true bed, was a major contributor to the discomfort and sleeplessness that peasants endured. The quality of one's sleeping arrangements varied widely depending on their social standing. Nobles and the wealthy had feather beds, soft linens, and privacy in their chambers. But for peasants, the bed was often a patchwork of straw, wool, and whatever materials they could afford to use. Over time, the mattress would lose its shape and comfort, becoming more of a collection of hard, uncomfortable lumps. Even when a peasant family could afford the occasional upgrade, the bed was a far cry from the luxurious comfort that wealthier individuals might enjoy. Picture the state of your bedding. The straw mattress, though it might provide a modicum of comfort, is often infested with insects, fleas, lice, or bedbugs. These pests, tiny as they were, would crawl through the bedding at night, making the peasant's sleep even more restless. The constant itching and discomfort would keep many awake long into the night, with sleep finally arriving only when sheer exhaustion took over. Even if you managed to sleep, the cold, damp air that seeped through the cracks in the walls would leave you shivering, your body stiff from the unyielding hardness of your bed. The issue of space was another major problem. In a small, often overcrowded cottage, the bed was a shared commodity. Whole families slept together in a single room, with children and adults all crammed into the same small space. There was little to no room for personal privacy or comfort, and this lack of space made it difficult to rest, even when sleep was finally achieved. With multiple people sharing the same bed, movements were constant, and the bed became a battleground for space. The slightest shift or sound could wake someone else, interrupting their fragile slumber. A good night's sleep, in these conditions, was often a rare luxury. The lack of privacy and the constant closeness of family members also contributed to the restlessness. The room, small and often dark, felt suffocating at times, as though there was no escape from the pressure of living in close quarters. The ever-present proximity of others, both in body and mind, could create a sense of discomfort that made sleep feel more like an endurance test than a peaceful escape. In the quiet of the night, it was not just the sounds of the household that disturbed the peace. It was the mental strain of knowing that there was little room for escape or solitude. Beyond these physical difficulties, there was also the psychological toll of a peasant's life. The worries of the day, concerns about crops, harvests, or the unpredictable weather, often carried over into the night. For many peasants, sleep was not just an escape from the physical burdens of labor, but an attempt to escape the anxiety of survival. The threat of famine, disease, or political upheaval loomed large in their minds, and these worries would often keep them awake. The mental strain of living on the edge of survival, coupled with the discomfort of the bed, made sleep a rare and fleeting solace. Even more disconcerting were the elements that no bed could shield against, the forces of nature. As medieval homes were often poorly constructed, drafty and unsealed, the cold of the night would seep in through every crack and crevice. In winter, the cold could be unbearable, and despite the warmth of a small fire, it often couldn't reach the bed, leaving you shivering beneath the thin covers. The air in the room, stagnant and damp, was another source of discomfort. The smell of mildew and the musty scent of old straw filled the air, and even if you managed to find a brief moment of sleep, the discomfort of the environment often interrupted it. The small, uncomfortable bed of the peasant reflects the deep disparities in medieval society. While the nobility rested in comfort, protected by thick draperies and soft bedding, the peasantry was forced to endure the hardships of a much less forgiving existence. Yet, for many peasants, sleep was a fleeting reprieve, not something to be enjoyed or savored. It was a brief escape from the day's hardships, one that was often interrupted by discomfort, the presence of others, or the anxieties of an uncertain world. As the night drags on, you lie awake in your bed of straw, your body stiff from the lack of comfort, and your mind racing with worries. You can hear the sounds of your family's restless movements beside you, each shift and rustle a reminder that you are not alone in your discomfort. And yet, despite the harshness of your bed, sleep begins to find its way to you, slowly, reluctantly, after hours of struggle. It is not a peaceful rest, but rather a moment of fragile relief, as your body gives in to exhaustion. The peasant's bed was a place where restlessness took root, both in the body and the mind. It was a bed born from necessity, shaped by a life of hard labor and few comforts. For the medieval peasant, sleep was not an indulgence, it was a fleeting moment of survival, a brief interlude before the relentless demands of the day began anew. In the medieval period, dreams were not simply the fleeting product of a tired mind. They were seen as omens, messages from the divine or the supernatural, and reflections of one's inner state. The medieval worldview, deeply intertwined with religious and spiritual beliefs, held that dreams could provide glimpses into the future, reveal hidden truths, or even expose a person's sins. The interpretation of dreams was a serious matter, one that could shape the way people lived their daily lives and, in some cases, even affect their fate. Imagine yourself lying in a darkened medieval bedchamber, the thin sheets tangled around you, and the air heavy with the scent of incense. As you close your eyes, sleep comes slowly, your mind still buzzing with the thoughts and concerns of the day. But as you drift into deeper slumber, the boundary between wakefulness and the dream world begins to blur. In your dreams, you find yourself walking through a dense, foggy forest. The trees loom tall, their branches creaking in the wind, and you feel a sense of unease in the pit of your stomach. Suddenly, a figure appears, a shadowy, indistinct form, and your heart races. Is it a friend or foe? A messenger or a demon? When you awaken, you are unsettled, the dream still lingering in your mind. You wonder, what did it mean? Could it be a message from God? Or perhaps a warning of some kind? In the medieval world, these questions were not just idle musings. They were matters of profound importance. Dreams were not to be taken lightly, and many people sought the guidance of healers, priests, or scholars to interpret them. For the medieval mind, dreams were closely linked to the soul's condition. They were seen as windows into the spiritual realm, offering a chance to glimpse divine will or the workings of unseen forces. Some believed that dreams could offer forewarnings of future events, predictions of death, illness, or misfortune. Others saw dreams as revelations of divine favor or disfavor, reflecting one's moral and spiritual standing. A nightmare, for example, might be interpreted as a sign of spiritual impurity, a reflection of sin or guilt that needed to be addressed before the soul could find peace. The dream world, though, was not always a realm of divine guidance. It was also a place where evil spirits or demonic forces could enter. Some medieval people believed that bad dreams were the work of malevolent entities, spirits, demons, or witches, who sought to torment the soul during its vulnerable moments of sleep. In this view, a terrifying dream could be seen as a direct attack on the sleeper's peace, a sign that they were under the influence of dark forces. Dreams of being chased, suffocated, or trapped were often associated with these supernatural disturbances, and they were taken as a sign that the sleeper needed spiritual protection, prayer, or ritual purification. Imagine now that you have visited a local priest to seek an interpretation for your unsettling dream. The priest, an older man with a deep, gravelly voice, listens carefully as you recount the details. He nods, his brow furrowed, and begins to speak of the significance of dreams in Scripture. "You may have seen a shadowy figure," he says, "but this could be the sign of a soul in peril. Perhaps there is a sin that has not been confessed, a burden that weighs heavily on your spirit." His words are solemn, and though you feel a slight sense of relief, there is also a nagging fear in your chest. The dream, he says, is a call to prayer, a warning that you must seek forgiveness before the darkness of your soul can be lifted. For some medieval people, the interpretation of dreams was a form of spiritual guidance, but for others, it could be a source of anxiety and distress. The idea that a dream could be an omen, foretelling disaster, death, or punishment, was a heavy burden. For those who struggled with guilt or fear, it could feel as though every dream was a message that something was wrong, that they were in danger of divine wrath or eternal damnation. In such cases, the pressure to correct the issues revealed by the dream could lead to a sense of dread and unease, further disrupting their sleep. The interpretation of dreams was also a dangerous practice, particularly when it involved accusations of witchcraft or heresy. If a dream was interpreted as a sign of demonic influence, it could lead to accusations of being under the sway of dark forces. A person who had a series of troubling dreams might be suspected of witchcraft, especially if the dreams were perceived as supernatural or malevolent in nature. The Church, with its vast influence over medieval life, often took a strict stance against anything that might be seen as heretical, and dream interpretation was no exception. People accused of witchcraft, especially women, were sometimes believed to be capable of manipulating dreams to influence others, casting evil, or tempting dreams that could disrupt the spiritual peace of the community. In many cases, dream interpretation was not just a spiritual matter but also a social one. If a person had a particularly vivid or unsettling dream, it might be shared with others in the community, and they, too, would offer their interpretations. This sharing of dreams was often a way of connecting with others, seeking validation, and attempting to make sense of the chaotic and frightening world of dreams. But as with any shared belief, there was always the risk of misinterpretation, gossip, and exaggeration. A troubling dream could quickly become a source of collective anxiety, with people interpreting it in ways that reflected their own fears, prejudices, or superstitions. Imagine yourself again, lying in your bed, trying to sleep, but now burdened by the weight of your dream's meaning. Perhaps the priest's words have stuck with you, and you can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. As you close your eyes, you wonder whether your dreams will offer more revelations, or whether they will haunt you with further warnings. The pressure to interpret each dream, to analyze each detail, weighs heavily on you, making it hard to rest easy. The dreams that come may seem ever more vivid, more full of meaning, and in the stillness of the night, the line between what is real and what is imagined begins to blur. The dangers of medieval dream interpretation lay in the ways that dreams could become both a source of spiritual insight and a cause of distress. The desire to find meaning in dreams was natural. The human mind craves understanding and clarity, especially when faced with uncertainty. But in the medieval period, the interpretation of dreams could also become a trap, a source of fear, and an obstacle to peaceful sleep. The belief that every dream had a profound meaning, whether it was divine or demonic, could lead to a constant cycle of anxiety and self-doubt. In many ways, the interpretation of dreams in medieval times reflects the broader anxieties of the period, an age where the spiritual and material worlds were deeply intertwined, and where the human experience was often framed by religious belief and supernatural fear. Sleep, which should have been a time for rest and rejuvenation, became instead a time of heightened tension, where each dream held the potential for divine favor or disastrous consequences. The pressure to interpret, to understand, and to act on these dreams added a layer of complexity to the already difficult lives of medieval people, making the simple act of sleeping into a fraught and sometimes dangerous endeavor. In the medieval world, sleep was not simply a matter of rest. It was a complex and multifaceted issue that touched on physical, spiritual, and even social aspects of life. For many, especially those of the lower classes, the act of falling asleep was far from a simple, peaceful endeavor. It was influenced by exhaustion, discomfort, anxiety, and, perhaps most intriguingly, alcohol. In the medieval period, ale and wine were not just beverages for socializing or quenching thirst. They were also used as sleep aids. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit medieval tavern, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and spilled wine. The flicker of candlelight casts long shadows on the stone walls, and the low murmur of conversation fills the space. As you sit at a rough-hewn wooden table, you take a sip of your ale, perhaps a strong, hearty brew that has been fermented over the course of weeks, its flavor both bitter and comforting. Ale was not only a daily staple of the medieval diet but also an important part of the night's ritual. For those struggling to sleep, it was a familiar remedy to calm the body and quiet the restless mind. Ale, particularly in the medieval period, was often brewed to be much weaker than modern beers, but its effect was still noticeable. Ale was consumed widely, not only because of its nutritional value but because it was often seen as a safer alternative to drinking water, which could be contaminated. The alcohol in the ale would have a soothing effect, relaxing the body and mind. For many, it was the perfect way to wind down after a long day of hard labor in the fields or work in the home. The warmth of the drink, combined with its mild intoxicating effects, would ease the muscles and calm the senses, allowing people to finally drift into a restful sleep. Now picture yourself in a small cottage, where the sounds of the outside world fade into silence. The family gathers around a low table, sharing a simple meal. The evening is quiet, and after the meal, the ritual of sleep begins. The head of the household pours a warm mug of ale for each member of the family, and as you sip the liquid, the warmth spreads through your body. The familiar bitterness of the drink begins to dull the tension in your muscles. It's not a cure for your troubles or a guaranteed way to sleep, but it provides a brief moment of escape, a break from the aches and discomforts of a long day. The combination of physical relaxation and the calming effects of alcohol gradually makes sleep seem more attainable. While ale was often the drink of choice, wine, too, played a significant role in medieval sleep remedies. Wine was typically reserved for the wealthier classes, but it still held a central place in medieval life. Wine was often consumed in the evenings, sometimes mixed with spices or herbs to enhance its flavor. It was not only enjoyed as a social beverage, but was also believed to have medicinal properties. For those suffering from sleeplessness or anxiety, wine was thought to have a calming effect on the body, helping to induce sleep. Imagine now a noble family, gathered in their grand dining hall, the firelight casting a warm glow on the polished stone floors. After a hearty meal, the wine is poured into goblets, rich and dark, its deep color catching the light. The sweet, comforting taste of the wine provides a sense of luxury, but it also serves a functional purpose. A servant brings a special bottle, spiced with cinnamon and cloves, designed to promote a deep and restful sleep. This medicinal wine, with its soothing qualities, is consumed with the same reverence as the fine food that accompanies it. It's not merely a drink but a necessary aid to ensure a peaceful night's rest. Yet, for all its soothing effects, the reliance on ale and wine for sleep was not without its risks. Alcohol, while effective in helping people to relax, could also become a crutch, leading to dependency. In the medieval period, the understanding of addiction was limited, and alcohol's potential for abuse was often overlooked. What began as a simple remedy for sleeplessness could, over time, evolve into a habitual reliance on alcohol to aid sleep. For some, the line between using ale and wine as a sleep aid and using it as a means of escape was thin, and the social and physical effects of alcohol consumption were not fully understood. In addition to this, the effects of alcohol on sleep were not always beneficial. While it might help people fall asleep initially, alcohol often disrupted the quality of sleep. Studies in modern times have shown that alcohol, particularly when consumed in large quantities, can lead to fragmented sleep patterns, preventing the deeper stages of restorative sleep. In medieval times, however, this was not known, and the practice of drinking before bed continued largely unchecked. As you lie in bed, feeling the warmth of the ale or wine still coursing through your body, you may find that sleep comes more easily, but it is not the restful slumber that you might have hoped for. The haze of alcohol drapes over your mind, dulling the sharpness of your thoughts. but it also prevents you from sinking into the deeper, more rejuvenating stages of sleep. Perhaps you doze, but the sleep is fitful, the mind clouded with a sense of lingering discomfort. The alcohol may have given you a brief respite from the exhaustion of the day, but it has not healed the deeper causes of your restlessness. For medieval people, ale and wine were not just simple pleasures, they were practical tools, used to ward off insomnia and to help them navigate the challenges of their daily lives. These beverages played a significant role in socializing, in bonding with family and friends, and in aiding the body's transition to rest. But they were also a double-edged sword, offering both relief and risks. The calming effects of alcohol could offer solace after a long day, but they could also contribute to an unhealthy dependency that blurred the line between remedy and indulgence. In the quiet of the night, as the last sips of ale or wine settle into your body, you might reflect on the role that alcohol has played in your life. Has it become a tool for sleep, a way to quiet the mind? Or has it simply added another layer of uncertainty, leaving you wondering whether true rest can ever be achieved? The medieval practice of using ale and wine as sleep aids reflects the broader tension in medieval life, the balance between physical comfort and spiritual or mental unrest. While the warmth of the drink may soothe the body, it cannot always calm the restless spirit. And as the night unfolds, you are left with the same question that many in the medieval period faced: is there ever a truly restful sleep, or does it always come with a price? In the medieval period, medical knowledge was primitive at best, and the tools available to physicians were rudimentary and often dangerous. The concept of hygiene was barely understood, and diseases were often attributed to supernatural forces, imbalances of the humors, or divine punishment. Healers and physicians, though often well-meaning, had limited understanding of the human body, and their methods, especially when it came to treating conditions like insomnia, were frequently more harmful than helpful. The physician's toolkit was sparse, consisting of a few basic instruments and a wealth of remedies based on folklore, superstitions, and religious beliefs. Imagine yourself in a small, dark room, the faint smell of herbs and burning incense in the air. The physician, an older man with a long, graying beard, stands before you. He is dressed in a simple robe, his hands steady as he prepares his tools. There is no antiseptic, no clean linens, only the worn instruments of his trade, a set of lancets for bloodletting, a few wooden cups for cupping therapy, and a bundle of herbs wrapped in a cloth. These are the tools of healing, yet they offer little comfort. In fact, the sight of them, sharp, invasive, and crude, brings a sense of unease. You have come to this physician because you cannot sleep. The restless nights have worn you down, and the constant fatigue is beginning to take a toll on your daily life. Your mind races, your body aches, and you long for the peace of a good night's rest. The physician listens patiently as you describe your symptoms, the difficulty falling asleep, the endless tossing and turning, the waking up in the middle of the night, unable to return to slumber. He nods, though his expression remains unreadable. Your humors are out of balance, he says, his voice low and serious. He gestures toward his instruments. I will use bloodletting to restore equilibrium to your body. It will help with the restlessness. And after that, I will prepare a soothing herbal concoction to calm your mind. The physician's diagnosis is based on a theory of medicine that, while prevalent in his time, is now considered archaic, the theory of humors. According to this ancient belief, the human body was governed by 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was thought to be a matter of balancing these humors, and when they became unbalanced, illness would result. Insomnia, in the eyes of the medieval physician, was a result of an excess of blood, which needed to be drained through bloodletting in order to restore balance. You watch uneasily as the physician prepares to draw your blood. He selects a vein in your arm, wipes it with a damp cloth, and then, with a steady hand, plunges a lancet into your skin. The blood begins to flow into a small cup, and you feel a slight dizziness wash over you. The procedure is not painful, but it is disorienting. This act of removing a portion of your blood in the hopes of curing your sleeplessness. The physician continues to watch you closely, ensuring that the process is as controlled as possible. When he is satisfied, he gently presses a cloth to the wound to stop the bleeding, and then offers you a mug of warm herbal tea. The herbs in the tea, perhaps chamomile, valerian, or lavender, are meant to calm your nerves and ease your mind, promoting a deeper sleep. These herbs have been used for centuries, passed down through generations of healers, and though their effects can be soothing, they are not without their risks. In the absence of modern understanding of medicine, the medieval physician relied on trial and error, often combining remedies in ways that were not always effective or safe. You take the tea, its scent calming, but the taste is bitter, earthy, and harsh. As you sip it, the warmth of the liquid spreads through your body, and you begin to feel a slight drowsiness take over. But it is not the restful sleep you long for. It is an uneasy, uncertain sensation, as though you are caught between wakefulness and slumber, not fully able to relax. The reality of medieval medical practices was that they were often ineffective and, in many cases, harmful. The tools at the physician's disposal were crude by modern standards. Bloodletting, while intended to balance the humors, often left patients weaker and more vulnerable to infection. The lancets, though they were used with skill, were not sterilized, and the risk of sepsis from an unclean instrument was high. Infections were common, and many people who underwent bloodletting procedures, whether for insomnia or other ailments, found themselves suffering from complications that made their condition worse. Even the herbal remedies that were so commonly used were not always safe. While some herbs, such as valerian, chamomile, and lavender, have mild sedative effects, they were often mixed with other, more potent substances that could cause harm. Poppy, a common ingredient in medieval sleep remedies, contained opiates that could easily lead to addiction or overdose. Many of these remedies were based on superstition, passed down without a full understanding of their effects. As a result, patients often found that the very treatments they hoped would bring relief were not only ineffective but potentially dangerous. Imagine now the many others who have come to the physician, seeking relief for their insomnia or other ailments. Some, like you, leave the consultation feeling a sense of unease but hopeful that the treatment will bring relief. Others, however, may find themselves suffering the consequences of the physician's limited knowledge. They may find that bloodletting leaves them weaker or that the herbal concoction causes further discomfort or side effects. And some may not even survive the procedure, victims of infection or poor treatment who succumb to their ailments in the days following their visit. In the medieval period, the physician's toolkit was limited, and their knowledge of the human body was based on ancient theories that were often wrong or incomplete. The reliance on bloodletting, herbal remedies, and other invasive practices was part of a medical system that was built more on tradition and superstition than on science. The physician's role was one of trial and error, with little understanding of the underlying causes of illness, and no reliable means of diagnosing or treating conditions like insomnia. As the night draws on, and you lie in your bed, the effects of the bloodletting and herbal tea begin to take hold. You feel more relaxed, but there is a lingering sense of discomfort in your body. The restless sleep you sought has not come. Instead, you drift in a haze of light, fragmented sleep, waking periodically throughout the night. In the end, the physician's tools, though well-intentioned, have offered only temporary relief, and you are left to wonder if true rest will ever come. The physician's toolkit, though simple, reflects the broader challenges of medieval medicine, an era where healing was as much about belief as it was about science. The search for sleep, for rest, for peace, was a journey fraught with uncertainty, where even the most trusted treatments often failed to deliver the promised relief. In the medieval period, the Church held an almost unparalleled influence over all aspects of life, including the practice of medicine and the treatment of ailments like insomnia. The spiritual and the physical were tightly woven together in the medieval worldview, and the Church's power extended far beyond matters of faith. For the common people, the path to healing often passed through the sacred walls of the Church. Priests, monks, and religious figures were seen as the ultimate authorities on matters of both the body and the soul. While medieval physicians might attempt to cure ailments with bloodletting, herbs, or other remedies, it was the Church that held the key to true healing, spiritual healing. Imagine yourself walking through the doors of a large, imposing cathedral. The air is thick with the smell of incense, and the echoes of chants and prayers reverberate through the vast stone interior. The flickering light of candles illuminates the carved statues of saints and angels, and you feel a deep sense of reverence as you take your place among the congregation. This is not just a place of worship, it is a center of life, a place where spiritual matters are addressed, and the soul is cared for. For many in the medieval world, the journey to healing, especially for conditions like insomnia, began here, within the sanctuary of the Church. For centuries, the Church held control over medical knowledge, particularly in Europe, where the majority of the population adhered to Christianity. While physicians and healers worked with herbs, potions, and rudimentary procedures, they often did so within the framework of religious doctrine. The Church believed that illnesses, including insomnia, were not only physical but spiritual in nature. If a person could not sleep, it was often seen as a sign of spiritual unrest, perhaps the result of sin, demonic possession, or a disconnect from God. This belief made the Church the central authority on all matters of health and healing. For those who sought relief from their sleepless nights, the road to healing was often paved with prayers and religious rituals. If you were struggling to sleep, you might find yourself in the presence of a priest, seeking guidance not only for your body but for your soul. The priest would listen to your concerns, offer spiritual comfort, and perhaps advise you to confess your sins, believing that your restless sleep was a result of your spiritual impurity. Sleep, in this view, was a form of spiritual surrender, a peaceful submission of the body and soul to God. If one could not sleep, it was often assumed that they had not fully surrendered their will to God's divine order. Imagine, then, that you are a peasant living in a small village. You have suffered from insomnia for weeks, your body weary, your mind troubled, and your spirit heavy. You are unable to find rest, no matter how much you try, and the exhaustion is beginning to take its toll on your daily life. You decide to visit the local church, hoping that the priest might be able to help. The priest listens to your story, his brow furrowed in concern, and then tells you that your insomnia is not just a physical ailment, it is a spiritual problem. He suggests that you confess your sins, repent, and pray for God's forgiveness. Only through these acts of spiritual cleansing can you hope to find rest. This process of spiritual healing was common in the medieval world. The Church believed that the body and soul were intricately linked, and that physical ailments were often a reflection of spiritual discord. If someone could not sleep, it was thought that their soul was troubled, perhaps burdened by unconfessed sins or by the weight of guilt. The Church's answer to insomnia was not a herbal remedy, but a call to repentance and prayer. Through acts of penance, the soul could be purified, and only then could rest be found. For many, this process could be both comforting and frustrating. On one hand, the idea that insomnia was a spiritual issue meant that it could be remedied through religious rituals, prayer, and confession. These practices offered hope, as they suggested that the problem was not insurmountable, and that healing could come through faith. On the other hand, the belief that insomnia was a spiritual failure could create feelings of guilt and shame, making it difficult to find comfort. The inability to sleep was seen as a direct reflection of one's moral or spiritual state, and for those struggling with chronic insomnia, this belief could be an added burden. The Church's influence over medical practices extended beyond just the diagnosis and treatment of physical ailments. It also shaped the very practice of healing itself. Monasteries, which were centers of religious life, were also places of learning and healing. Monks in these monasteries were often the only literate individuals in medieval communities, and many of them took on the role of healers, using the knowledge available to them in religious texts and ancient writings. The monks would often mix herbal remedies with prayers, believing that the power of God was necessary to complete the healing process. This combination of faith and medicine created a unique approach to healing, one that blended the physical with the spiritual. In some cases, the Church's influence could be stifling, as it discouraged the use of secular or non-religious healing methods. The rise of universities and medical schools during the medieval period brought a new wave of scientific inquiry, but even within these academic institutions, the Church's doctrines loomed large. Physicians were often required to consult with religious authorities before administering certain treatments, and there was a strong emphasis on using religious texts and prayers as part of the healing process. This resulted in a medical system that was not based on scientific evidence, but on religious faith and ancient beliefs, which could often delay the development of more effective treatments. For those who did not seek the help of physicians, the Church provided an alternative: the use of relics, holy water, and sacred objects. These items were believed to hold divine power and could be used to cure illnesses or provide protection against demons, including those that cause nightmares or sleep disturbances. Relics, such as bones or garments of saints, were highly prized and often carried by individuals who were ill or struggling with sleeplessness. The idea was that the physical contact with a holy relic or a visit to a shrine could bring healing and protection. Despite the Church's grip on medical practices, there were always those who resisted its control. Wise women, healers, and herbalists who lived in rural communities often relied on folk remedies passed down through generations. These women, many of whom were accused of witchcraft, used plants, potions, and rituals to help with sleep, but their knowledge was often viewed with suspicion by the Church. The tension between religious authority and folk medicine created an environment where the search for sleep was not just a matter of finding rest, but of navigating the complex and sometimes dangerous world of spiritual belief and healing practices. The Church's influence over healing was deeply entwined with its control over the body and soul. Sleep was not simply a physiological need, it was a spiritual matter, one that could only be addressed through prayer, penance, and divine intervention. In medieval society, the role of women in medicine was complex and often fraught with danger. While men dominated the more formalized and religiously sanctioned practices of medicine, women, particularly in rural areas, were often the primary healers in their communities. These women, often known as wise women or cunning women, were skilled in the use of herbs, potions, and rituals passed down through generations. They were not only responsible for treating common ailments like sleeplessness, but also for helping with childbirth, diagnosing illnesses, and even performing some rudimentary surgeries. Yet, despite their essential role in healing, these women were often marginalized, their knowledge regarded with suspicion by both the Church and secular authorities. Imagine yourself in a small, rural village, far from the reach of the nearest town. The air is thick with the scent of herbs drying in the sun, and the humble cottage you step into is filled with the earthy smell of plants, the warmth of the hearth, and the quiet bustle of activity. The woman who lives here is known to everyone in the village. She is the one who knows the secrets of plants, the one who can ease the pain of a sick child, the one who can offer remedies for sleeplessness and nightmares. Her knowledge of herbal medicine is unparalleled, and her reputation has spread far and wide. But despite her vital role in the community, she faces suspicion. Her power, though rooted in tradition and necessity, is often misunderstood. You approach her, seeking a remedy for your restless nights, knowing that sleep has eluded you for far too long. She welcomes you into her home, offering you a seat by the fire. Her eyes are kind, but there is a wariness in them, a deep understanding of the risks she faces. She begins to mix a brew of valerian root, lavender, and chamomile, simple herbs that she has gathered from the surrounding fields. These plants, she tells you, are known for their calming properties and can ease the tension in both body and mind, bringing relief to those suffering from insomnia. She tells you that many come to her for remedies like this, especially those who are haunted by nightmares, as she is trusted to help them find peace in their sleep. As you sit with her, you can't help but notice the subtle undercurrent of fear that surrounds her. Though she offers her services freely, she knows that her knowledge is dangerous. The Church, with its rigid beliefs about health and healing, views her practices with suspicion. To be a woman who heals is to walk a fine line between providing essential care and courting the suspicion of both religious and secular authorities. For centuries, women who practiced healing outside of the accepted religious framework were accused of witchcraft or heresy. The knowledge these women possessed, often rooted in ancient, pagan traditions, was seen as a threat to the Church's authority, and many women were persecuted as a result. The role of women in medieval healing was deeply tied to folk traditions and was often passed down from mother to daughter. This knowledge was both practical and spiritual, rooted in the earth, and yet sometimes seen as forbidden or even dangerous. The remedies these women used were often based on centuries of observation, trial and error, and the deep connection between the people and the land they lived on. But this practical knowledge, so essential to the survival of the community, was often regarded with suspicion by the Church. To the religious authorities, the use of herbs and spells was seen as dabbling in the occult, a dangerous flirtation with forces that were beyond the control of the divine. As a woman healer, you understand that your knowledge is both a gift and a burden. While the people of the village turn to you for help, there are those who view you with fear, or even contempt. The Church insists that only those with proper religious training have the right to heal, and the simple act of using herbs, charms, or rituals is seen as heretical. The slightest suspicion of witchcraft could lead to accusations, trials, and even execution. The stories of women who were accused of casting spells to cause harm, or who were blamed for misfortune in the community, are all too common. The very knowledge that allows you to heal could also lead to your downfall. Yet, despite the risks, these women persisted. They were essential to the health and well-being of their communities, often providing the only available care. In times when physicians were few and far between, and often out of reach for the poor, the village healer was the one who ensured that people could find relief from ailments like insomnia. Her remedies, though simple, were effective, often using the healing powers of nature in ways that were far more in tune with the rhythms of the body than the crude methods used by more formal physicians. As you sit with the wise woman, drinking the soothing tea she has prepared, you feel the calming effects slowly wash over you. The warmth of the herbs begins to spread through your body, and the tension in your muscles loosens. You feel your mind quiet, and the weight of your restless thoughts begins to ease. It is a subtle, gentle relief, different from the harsh, invasive treatments you have received from physicians. Here, there is no fear of infection, no invasive procedures, just the healing power of nature and the wisdom of the woman before you. Yet, as the soothing effects of the herbal brew settle over you, you realize that this woman's knowledge, her deep understanding of the plants, the earth, and the rhythms of the body, comes at a great cost. She is constantly at risk, constantly under suspicion. In the eyes of the Church, she is as much a threat as a healer, a symbol of rebellion against the established order. Her knowledge, passed down through generations, is both her gift and her curse. In the medieval world, the women who practiced healing were often both revered and reviled. Their knowledge, while essential to the well-being of the community, was seen as dangerous, even subversive. These women were the gatekeepers of a world of ancient knowledge, one that was rooted in the earth and the rhythms of nature, yet it was a world that threatened the established powers of religion and authority. They walked a tightrope, balancing the needs of their communities with the ever-present threat of persecution. For those who turned to these women for help, their remedies offered not just physical relief, but a sense of connection to a deeper, more ancient form of healing, one that was both practical and spiritual. The wise women of the medieval period were a symbol of resilience and defiance, holding on to knowledge that had been passed down through generations, even as the forces of the Church sought to silence them. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval world, providing comfort and healing in a time when both the body and the soul were in constant peril. In the medieval world, night was not merely the time when the day's activities came to a close. It was a time filled with dread, superstition, and unseen dangers. The darkness was not just a backdrop for sleep, but a looming presence that threatened to disrupt the lives of the people who lived under its cover. From the perspective of medieval villagers and townsfolk, the night was an unpredictable, dangerous force, a time when threats, whether real or imagined, could strike without warning. For those who struggled with insomnia, this fear of the night was compounded by the terrifying sense of vulnerability that came with not being able to sleep, knowing that the world around you was filled with unseen threats. Imagine yourself standing in a medieval village as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. The day's activities have come to an end, and the streets begin to empty, leaving only the flickering light of oil lamps illuminating the path. The buildings, constructed from timber and stone, seem to close in on you as the temperature drops. The quiet is unsettling, broken only by the occasional sound of an animal or the distant cry of a night bird. This is the hour when fears are heightened, the time when superstitions run rampant, and the fear of the unseen becomes a palpable presence. As you walk back to your cottage, the world around you seems to grow more threatening. The air feels heavier, and your senses seem sharper. The idea of the unknown takes root, the fear of spirits, demons, and dark forces that were believed to come out under the cover of night. The medieval mind was steeped in these beliefs, and the night was often regarded as the time when these forces could take hold. The superstition of nocturnal terrors was rooted in the idea that darkness allowed malevolent forces, both human and supernatural, to act freely, without the restrictions of daylight. In a world where the supernatural was often as real as the physical world, sleep became not only a time for rest, but a potential battle for survival. For many in medieval Europe, sleep was fraught with anxiety, particularly because it meant surrendering to the vulnerability of the night. The fear of spirits, restless souls, and evil entities that might enter their homes during sleep was widespread. Folk tales and legends were filled with tales of malicious creatures, night demons, spirits of the dead, and witches, who would creep into homes during the night to harm the living. It was common to believe that the devil himself would seek to disturb the sleeping, working through these dark forces to corrupt the soul. Imagine lying in your bed, unable to sleep, your senses heightened by the stillness around you. The wind howls outside, causing the wooden walls of your cottage to creak and groan. The sounds seem to come from every direction, and the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight take on strange, unsettling shapes. You try to push the thoughts of spirits and demons out of your mind, but they creep back in, just as the darkness settles in around you. The fear of the unknown, of what might be lurking in the shadows, keeps you awake. The night seems to stretch on endlessly, and sleep is no comfort. It is a state of fear, a time when anything could happen. In many medieval communities, the darkness of night was also associated with crime and danger. The streets were unsafe, and the cover of night allowed criminals to act with impunity. Theft, violence, and even murder were more likely to occur after the sun went down, and the poor lighting in villages and towns made it difficult for people to feel secure in their homes. For peasants, who often lived in small, cramped cottages, the fear of being attacked during the night was real. The thought of intruders entering through the door or window during the night, when everyone was asleep and defenseless, was a constant source of anxiety. The fear of the unknown at night wasn't just physical. It was also psychological. The medieval mind, constantly navigating a world filled with illness, famine, and political instability, often looked to the night as a time when the soul was most vulnerable. The dark hours were thought to be when a person's sins, regrets, and fears could overtake them, and it was believed that the soul might be tested in ways it could not endure. For those struggling with insomnia, this fear could exacerbate their suffering, as they lay awake, trapped in their own minds, unable to escape from the thoughts that plagued them. As the night wore on, the fear of sleep itself became a terrifying reality. Those suffering from insomnia were not only faced with the challenge of overcoming physical exhaustion, but also the psychological strain of knowing that they were vulnerable in the darkness. The medieval person was acutely aware of the dangers of the night, and when sleep was denied, it was as if they were left exposed to those dangers, both external and internal. In a way, sleeplessness became a form of torment, an endless cycle of fear and fatigue, where the mind was never allowed to rest. The fear of the night was not only rooted in superstition but also in the real dangers that medieval people faced. Illness, famine, and death were constant companions, and the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on the minds of those who lived through difficult times. For many, sleep was a temporary escape from this grim reality. But when that escape was denied, the terror of what lay outside, whether it was the creeping unknown of evil spirits, or the very real threats of violence and death, became all-consuming. The medieval fear of nighttime dangers was not just about ghosts or witches, but about the deep, existential anxiety that permeated every aspect of life. Night, sleep, and the vulnerability that came with them symbolized the fragility of existence itself. To sleep was to surrender to the darkness, to give up control and trust that rest would come. But for those who could not sleep, the night became an unyielding presence, both a source of fear and a reminder of the many forces beyond their control. The image of a grand medieval castle conjures visions of opulence and luxury, high stone walls, towering spires, and lavish banquets in great halls. For the nobility, sleep was thought to be a privilege, a time to rest their tired bodies and prepare for the day ahead. But despite the wealth and grandeur associated with their lives, even the nobles were not exempt from the struggles of sleep. In fact, their beds and sleeping conditions, while more comfortable than those of the peasants, were far from the serene, restful havens one might imagine. Imagine yourself entering a large, ornate chamber in a castle. The room is cold, its stone walls thick and unyielding, and the fire in the hearth flickers weakly, casting more shadows than light. The four-poster bed is draped with heavy tapestries, luxurious, yes, but also stifling, providing little ventilation to the thick air of the room. The bed is adorned with soft, velvet cushions and thick woolen blankets, and though it is far more comfortable than the straw mattresses of peasants, it is still a far cry from the modern comforts we might associate with rest. The bedding might look rich, but it is heavy, thick, and warm to the point of discomfort. The weight of the blankets can be suffocating, especially in a room that is poorly ventilated, and the cold stone beneath can create an atmosphere that is hardly conducive to deep, restful sleep. For the nobility, sleep was often interrupted by the demands of their social position. The grandness of their lives came with its own set of burdens, late-night meetings, discussions with advisors, and the constant need to be alert for political and military threats. The fear of assassination or attack was ever present, and even the nobility were not immune to the anxiety that plagued the lower classes. While they may have had the luxury of larger beds and more sumptuous surroundings, they often found themselves sleepless due to the pressures of leadership, governance, and the constant awareness of danger. Noble families typically had a number of servants, and in the case of the wealthiest, the sleeping arrangements were often communal, even in the most grandiose of castles. These grand beds were often shared, with multiple family members sleeping in the same space. The idea of privacy was a rare luxury, and the constant presence of servants, attendants, and guards meant that the sense of tranquility that one might hope for in sleep was often elusive. The thick, heavy tapestries that lined the walls of their chambers, though providing some warmth, also kept the air stagnant. The rooms, though designed to be imposing and majestic, were also cold and damp, which created an environment that was far from ideal for sleep. Even those of high rank who were able to enjoy larger and more lavish beds often found them uncomfortable. The mattresses, although stuffed with down, feathers, or wool, were not the soft, springy cushions we are accustomed to today. They were flat and thin, providing little support. And while their silken bedclothes were beautiful, the weight of the layers could become oppressive, trapping the heat of the body and making it difficult to get the deep, restful sleep that was so desperately needed. Imagine the life of a noblewoman in a medieval castle. After a long day filled with ceremonial duties, political meetings, and managing the vast estate, she retreats to her chamber. The room is dark and cold, the thick curtains drawn to block the light of the rising moon. She lies in her large, richly adorned bed, but the softness of the bedding does little to help her sleep. The heavy weight of her responsibilities presses on her mind, and she cannot help but think of the burdens that await her the next day: the management of the estate, the well-being of the peasants under her care, the potential for unrest or rebellion in the distant corners of her lands. The anxiety and stress that accompany her noble role often make sleep a fleeting, restless endeavor. Noble men, too, found sleep difficult. The ever-present threats of war, political maneuvering, and the struggle for power meant that even the wealthiest had their minds weighed down with worry. A king or a duke might lie awake, planning strategy, considering alliances, and thinking of the military threats that could arise. His bed, no matter how grand, became a place not of rest, but of troubled thought. Noble children, in particular, often slept poorly. Their sleep, too, was often disturbed by the anxiety of their future roles, the weight of expectations, and the knowledge that their lives would be shaped by the power struggles of the adults around them. The expectations placed on children, especially those born to royalty, were immense. Young princes and princesses were trained in the arts of governance and warfare from an early age, and the constant pressure to live up to the family legacy left little room for the carefree, peaceful sleep that childhood should bring. The stress of their upbringing often manifested in nightmares or insomnia, making even the most lavish beds in the castle no guarantee of a restful night. In contrast to the peasants' struggle to find space and comfort, the nobility's problem lay in the contrast between the grandeur of their surroundings and the emotional and mental strain that came with their elevated status. The wealth and status they enjoyed were constantly weighed against the stress and responsibility that accompanied such privilege. For some nobles, the pressure to maintain power, secure wealth, and manage the lives of countless subjects could be overwhelming, leading to sleepless nights that only served to compound their worries. In addition to the pressures of their responsibilities, many noble families suffered from illnesses that kept them from finding restful sleep. The close living quarters, poor hygiene, and lack of proper sanitation made castles breeding grounds for disease. The presence of rats, fleas, and lice in the grand halls and sleeping chambers meant that sickness was never far away. For many, the anxiety of illness compounded their sleeplessness, and the fear of an epidemic or disease that could strike at any time made sleep a less than comforting experience. Even when sleep did come to the nobility, it was often shallow and disrupted by the distractions of their wealth and status. The noise of servants coming and going, the clatter of horses and carts outside, and the constant worries of governance and protection made it difficult to truly rest. While peasants might have faced physical discomfort due to their humble living conditions, nobles faced an equally oppressive strain: the mental and emotional toll of managing vast estates, securing their family's legacy, and navigating the dangerous waters of medieval politics. The lives of the wealthy were far from the peaceful, restful existence that we might imagine, and sleep, while more comfortable in physical terms, was often just as elusive for them as it was for the poor. The weight of responsibility, the fear of assassination or war, and the constant pressures of nobility meant that even in the most luxurious of beds, sleep was often a fleeting and unreliable escape. As the night stretches on, you lie in your grand bed, the weight of your blankets pressing down on you. Though the room is richly adorned, and the fire crackles softly in the hearth, your mind is restless. Thoughts of your kingdom, your people, and the future of your family race through your mind, keeping you awake. In the medieval period, sleep was not merely a natural process for rest, but a domain rich with symbolism, superstitions, and folklore. The night, the time when most people would fall asleep, was seen as a realm where the physical and the supernatural intertwined. As such, a host of beliefs and practices grew up around the concept of sleep, many of which were designed to protect the sleeper from the dangers of the dark and ensure a restful night. Imagine yourself walking through a medieval village at dusk. The sun is sinking beneath the horizon, and a chill settles in the air. The world around you becomes quieter, the flickering lanterns casting shadows on the cobbled streets. You pass by homes with their doors shut tight and shutters drawn, preparing for the inevitable dangers of the night. People mutter prayers or chant protective words, and small charms are placed under pillows, doors, or windows. Sleep, for many, was not simply a time for rest, but a time fraught with risk, requiring various protections and rituals to ensure safety and peace of mind. One of the most common pieces of folklore related to sleep was the belief in nightmares, a term that originates from medieval times. A nightmare was not merely a bad dream. It was thought to be the work of a supernatural being, often a malicious spirit or demon, that would sit on a person's chest while they slept, causing them to feel as if they were suffocating. These evil spirits, sometimes referred to as night hags, were believed to enter the room while the sleeper was vulnerable, bringing with them a sense of dread and suffocation. The terror felt during such a visit was not just an unpleasant dream, but a manifestation of the very real threat that the spirit posed. In response to these night terrors, people developed various methods to protect themselves while they slept. A common protective measure was the placement of a knife, sword, or other sharp object under the bed. This practice was believed to cut away the power of the night hag or any other malevolent spirit that might try to torment the sleeper. It was thought that the sharp blade would sever any connection between the person and the spirit, ensuring a peaceful night's rest. You can imagine a family, gathered before bed, preparing for the night with these protective practices. A young girl, her hair braided and eyes wide with fear, asks her mother why they placed the knife under the bed. The mother, with the quiet confidence of someone who has passed down this tradition from her own mother, explains that the blade will keep away the evil spirits. It is a ritual that has been passed down through generations, a belief in the power of the material world to ward off the dangers of the unseen world. Another widespread belief in medieval folklore was the idea of sleeping with one's head to the north. It was believed that the direction in which you slept could affect your health and the quality of your rest. For many, Sleeping with the head pointing north was thought to bring a more restful and peaceful night, while sleeping in other directions could lead to nightmares, restless sleep, or even illness. This belief was deeply rooted in the idea that the earth itself was imbued with spiritual energy, and the way one oriented their body during sleep could influence the balance of their humors and overall health. There were also many superstitions surrounding dreams. In a world where divine messages were sought in all aspects of life, dreams were seen as a potential channel for communication with the divine. Certain dreams were thought to foretell the future, predicting illness, good fortune, or even death. In some cultures, the belief that dreams were prophetic was so strong that people would seek out dream interpreters to uncover the meaning behind their nocturnal visions. It was believed that specific objects or actions could alter the course of dreams or even prevent bad dreams from occurring. People would sleep with objects such as a piece of bread under their pillow or a sprig of rosemary to promote good dreams, or to ward off the influence of evil spirits. Superstitions around sleep were not limited to individual practices. They also extended to the broader social fabric of medieval life. At times, people would call upon local healers or wise women to perform protective rituals for a restless sleeper. These rituals, often a combination of prayer and magic, were meant to shield the person from the malevolent forces that threatened their sleep. One common practice was the use of sleeping potions, made from herbs like valerian, lavender, or poppy, which were believed to not only help one sleep but also protect the sleeper from dark forces during the night. Even the act of waking up was surrounded by superstition. The first person to speak to you after waking could influence the rest of your day. It was believed that if the first words you heard upon waking were negative, it could set the tone for the entire day. Conversely, hearing positive words or blessings could bring good fortune. This belief led to rituals where family members or loved ones would recite a prayer or say a blessing to ensure a smooth and successful day ahead. In the world of medieval folklore, the night was a time of both mystery and danger. Sleep was a vulnerable state, and the terror of the night was made all the more intense by the belief that it was a time when supernatural forces could enter the waking world and influence a person's life. The customs, rituals, and superstitions surrounding sleep were designed to protect the sleeper from these unseen dangers, creating a protective barrier between the physical and spiritual realms. For those who struggled with insomnia or nightmares, these beliefs provided not just comfort but also a sense of control over the forces that threatened their peace. The stories of night hags, evil spirits, and prophetic dreams continue to resonate in modern culture, but for the medieval person, these beliefs were deeply rooted in everyday life. The fear of the dark was not merely a fear of the unknown, it was a fear of the very real forces that were believed to inhabit the night, and sleep itself became a battleground between the forces of good and evil. To sleep was to surrender, but only if you were properly protected. The rise of sleep-related folklore speaks to the deep anxieties of medieval life, where rest was not merely a physical need but a spiritual struggle. In the medieval period, the connection between food, health, and sleep was poorly understood by modern standards. However, the food people ate was believed to play a significant role in the quality of their sleep, though often in ways that were more about superstition and philosophy than actual scientific knowledge. The medieval diet, often heavy in bread, simple grains, and meats, affected not only the physical well-being of the people but also their ability to rest. The foods they consumed were thought to impact their humors, the four bodily fluids that medieval physicians believed governed health. When the humors were balanced, sleep was peaceful, but when they were out of balance, insomnia and restless nights were inevitable. Imagine yourself sitting at a large wooden table in the heart of a medieval cottage, the fire crackling in the hearth. The evening meal is simple, but hearty, a thick porridge made of oats, perhaps, or a hunk of coarse bread with a side of salted meat or cheese. The smells of the food fill the room, earthy and robust. As you eat, you consider the ways in which your diet, simple but nourishing, might affect your body and mind, especially when it comes to the restless nights that have been plaguing you. The medieval diet was often based on what could be grown or raised locally, and for most people, it consisted of simple, filling foods, grains like barley, rye, and oats, supplemented with vegetables like onions, cabbage, and leeks, and perhaps a modest portion of meat or fish. Bread was a staple, but it was often made from coarse flour, which was far less nutritious than the finely milled varieties that would come later. The lack of variety in the diet meant that many medieval people struggled with nutritional deficiencies, which could affect their overall health and well-being, including their ability to sleep. For those who relied on bread as their main food source, sleep could be a constant battle, as a bread-heavy diet often left them sluggish and uncomfortable. The medieval belief in the humors, that the body was composed of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, shaped how people viewed their diets. Physicians believed that imbalances in the humors could cause everything from fever and fatigue to sleeplessness. Certain foods were considered to heat or cool the body, and it was believed that eating the wrong foods could disrupt your humors and lead to restlessness. For example, foods that were considered too hot, like spicy meats or alcohol, were thought to cause an excess of heat in the body, making it more difficult to sleep. On the other hand, foods that were considered cooling, such as fruits, greens, and dairy, were thought to soothe the body and calm the mind, promoting restful sleep. Now imagine that you are suffering from insomnia, and the local healer suggests that you change your diet to help balance your humors. You are advised to cut back on the heavier, spicier foods, like rich stews or roasted meats, and instead eat simpler meals, broths, soups, and light vegetables. Perhaps she also suggests that you drink warm milk before bed, as dairy was thought to have a calming, cooling effect. You are skeptical, but the idea of altering your diet to improve your sleep seems worth a try. For the medieval peasants, the reality of their diet was often a far cry from the balanced meals recommended by healers. The poor were frequently malnourished, relying on bread and gruel for sustenance. Without access to a variety of vegetables, fruits, and proteins, their bodies were not getting the nutrients they needed to maintain balance. This lack of nutrition often led to poor health and restless sleep. Furthermore, the physical discomfort caused by an imbalanced diet, such as indigestion, bloating, or hunger, made it even more difficult to find peaceful rest at night. In addition to the nutritional challenges, the medieval diet was also shaped by superstitions and cultural beliefs. For instance, certain foods were considered unholy, or impure, particularly during religious fasts and periods of abstinence. Meat was often forbidden during Lent and other religious observances, and it was believed that consuming too much meat could upset the body's natural rhythms. On the other hand, fasting or eating too little could lead to weakness and restlessness, as the body struggled to function without sufficient fuel. Alcohol, particularly ale and wine, also played a significant role in the medieval diet and was often used as a sleep aid. While alcohol might have helped some people relax enough to fall asleep, it also disrupted sleep quality. The effects of alcohol on sleep were not understood in the medieval period, but many people drank ale or wine as part of their evening routine, believing that it could help them sleep better. It was common for both the wealthy and the poor to drink alcohol before bed, whether it was a simple cup of ale or a more potent wine spiced with herbs. While alcohol might induce drowsiness initially, it also caused fragmented sleep, leaving people to wake throughout the night feeling less rested and more fatigued. Imagine now the scene in a noble family's dining hall. After a hearty feast, the family gathers together to drink a warm, spiced wine, believing that it will help them sleep soundly through the night. The rich aroma of the wine fills the room, and everyone takes a sip, expecting the warmth to bring them comfort and rest. However, as the night wears on, the effects of the wine begin to take hold. Though it lulls them to sleep initially, the sleep is shallow, disrupted, and unsatisfying. By morning, the family awakens, not refreshed, but with a dull fatigue that lingers throughout the day. Though the wine had offered temporary relief, it had not provided true rest, leaving them in the same cycle of poor sleep. For the medieval healer or physician, diet was not only a question of nourishment but of balance. The goal was to regulate the body's internal systems through the food consumed, and it was believed that sleep disturbances were often the result of dietary imbalance. While we now know that insomnia can be caused by a variety of factors, the medieval mind linked poor sleep to dietary excesses or deficiencies, believing that proper nutrition could restore balance to the body and mind. As you lie in bed, perhaps sipping a warm cup of milk as suggested by the healer, you begin to reflect on the role of your diet in your own struggles with sleep. You've cut back on the heavy, rich foods and focused more on simple broths and vegetables. Perhaps, for the first time in weeks, you feel a slight sense of calm as the warmth of the milk settles in your stomach. You drift into a light sleep, wondering if this simple change could offer the solution to your troubled nights. The impact of diet on sleep, in medieval times, was a reflection of the broader worldview, that the body and its needs were intricately linked to spiritual and natural forces. It was not just a matter of physical health but of maintaining balance and harmony within oneself. The medieval approach to food and sleep reflects a time when the body was not understood as a mechanical system, but as a complex organism deeply connected to the natural world, the divine, and the forces of the unseen. In the medieval period, monasteries were not only places of religious worship and contemplation, they were also centers of learning and healing. These religious institutions, built around monastic life, were essential hubs for the preservation of knowledge, including knowledge about health, medicine, and sleep. Monks, who devoted their lives to prayer, study, and work, were often the most educated members of society. Their intellectual pursuits were not limited to theology. They also studied the natural world, including the properties of plants, the functioning of the body, and even the mysteries of sleep. Through the work of these monks, much of the medical and spiritual wisdom of the ancient world was preserved and passed down to future generations. Imagine walking through the stone hallways of a medieval monastery. The air is filled with the scent of burning candles and parchment, and the sound of whispered prayers echoes through the corridors. In the scriptorium, monks sit hunched over manuscripts, carefully copying texts by candlelight. These texts, often written in Latin, are not just religious scriptures but also medical treatises, herbal manuals, and philosophical works. The monks carefully transcribe the knowledge of the ancient world, knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time. Among these texts are the writings of Hippocrates, Galen, and other classical thinkers who explored the nature of the human body, the role of sleep, and the importance of balance in maintaining health. Monasteries became vital repositories for knowledge, especially in a time when much of Europe was illiterate and uneducated. In an age where books were scarce and costly, the monks of the medieval period took it upon themselves to preserve the intellectual heritage of earlier civilizations. They gathered, translated, and copied works that would eventually form the foundation for medical practices in the coming centuries. Much of what we know about medieval medical practices, including their approaches to sleep and insomnia, comes from the records and manuscripts preserved in these monastic institutions. The monks who worked in the monasteries were not just scholars, they were also healers. They cared for the sick and the weary, applying the knowledge they had gathered from both religious teachings and ancient medical texts. The monks' understanding of sleep was deeply intertwined with their spiritual beliefs. For them, sleep was not merely a biological function, it was an act of surrender to the divine will, a time for the soul to rest and rejuvenate. But the monks also understood that the body required physical rest to maintain health, and they developed practical knowledge about how to promote sleep and treat sleep disturbances. Imagine a monk, skilled in both prayer and herbal medicine, preparing a remedy for a villager suffering from insomnia. The monk gathers a collection of calming herbs, valerian, chamomile, and lavender, known for their soothing properties. He carefully brews a tea or prepares an infusion, knowing that these herbs can help the body relax and ease the mind. But the monk does not rely solely on herbal remedies. He also offers a prayer, invoking the divine to grant the person peace and rest. The combination of spiritual and physical healing is essential in the monk's practice. Sleep, like all aspects of health, is seen as a gift from God, and it is through divine intervention and natural remedies that the monk seeks to restore balance to the body and soul. The monk's understanding of sleep was not only practical but deeply spiritual. They viewed sleep as a necessary part of the natural order, a time when the body could recover from the exertions of the day and the soul could rest in the presence of God. In monastic communities, the hours of sleep were often regulated by the strict schedule of prayers and work. Monks followed a rigorous daily routine, which included multiple periods of prayer, manual labor, and study, as well as designated times for sleep. The monks believed that a structured and disciplined routine, including regular sleep, was essential for both physical and spiritual well-being. However, the monastic sleep schedule was not without its challenges. Monks typically slept in short bursts, divided by prayer times throughout the night. The most significant period of sleep came after Compline, the final prayer of the day, when the monks were allowed to rest for a few hours before rising again for matins, the early morning prayer. The monks' sleep was often interrupted by these prayers, which meant that their rest was not continuous. Though the monks believed that this rigorous schedule was part of their spiritual discipline, it often led to exhaustion and a lack of deep sleep. The combination of physical labor, intense study, and frequent prayer left little time for the uninterrupted rest that modern people would recognize as necessary for rejuvenation. The monks' approach to sleep also reflected the medieval worldview, which saw sleep not only as a natural need but as a spiritual act. To sleep well was to be at peace with God, to trust that He would grant rest to the body and soul. But for those whose sleep was disrupted, the monks had remedies at their disposal. The healing knowledge preserved and passed down through the centuries by the monks was a combination of ancient wisdom and Christian spiritual practices. For the monks, insomnia was not merely a physical issue, it was a sign of spiritual unrest, a disconnection from the divine. Prayer, meditation, and herbal remedies were all used to help restore balance to the sleeper, both physically and spiritually. In this way, the medieval monks played a pivotal role in preserving sleep-related knowledge during a time when much of Europe was isolated from the broader currents of intellectual and scientific thought. Their dedication to preserving texts and passing on their healing knowledge ensured that the wisdom of the ancients would not be lost. It is through their work that many of the medical practices and sleep remedies of the medieval period were preserved, providing the foundation for future advancements in the understanding of sleep and health. As the night deepens and the monks retire to their cells, their sleep, though often interrupted, is not a time of mere rest. It is a time for spiritual reflection and renewal, a time when the body and soul are given the opportunity to rest in the presence of the divine. And though the monks' sleep may have been brief and fragmented, their understanding of its importance, both as a physical and spiritual necessity, has influenced generations of healers, who would continue to explore the mysteries of sleep in the centuries to come. As we look back on the medieval era, with its rigid schedules, spiritual beliefs, and rudimentary healing practices, it may seem that the struggles of people during that time are distant, even foreign to us. Yet, when it comes to sleep, the echoes of medieval struggles remain surprisingly relevant in the modern world. In many ways, the issues that plagued those who lived in the past, the fear of the night, the anxieties about health, the dependence on sleep aids, continue to reverberate in contemporary society, where sleep disorders, insomnia, and the quest for restful sleep remain ever present. The medieval mind, much like ours today, was deeply concerned with the quality of sleep. While their methods may seem antiquated, such as the use of bloodletting, opiates, or the belief in night hags, the underlying struggles were the same: the difficulty of finding rest in a world that was physically demanding, mentally taxing, and filled with anxiety. For the medieval person, sleep was a vulnerable time, a time when the body could be attacked by spirits, demons, or illness. The fear of what could happen in the dark, when one was most vulnerable, is still a concern in the modern world, though in different forms. Today, we face the perils of sleep paralysis, nightmares, or the pervasive anxiety that haunts us when we try to sleep. These modern fears may not be rooted in the supernatural, but they are equally real and deeply unsettling. In the medieval period, people believed that sleeplessness was a sign of spiritual imbalance, a warning that one's soul was out of sync with divine will. They sought comfort in prayers, rituals, and superstitions to protect themselves from the dangers of the night. Today, while our understanding of sleep has evolved significantly, the connection between mental, emotional, and physical health remains unchanged. Modern science now recognizes that sleep disorders, whether insomnia, anxiety, or the effects of stress, can profoundly impact our health, relationships, and well-being. The quest for peaceful, restorative sleep is as urgent today as it was for medieval people, who sought refuge in their prayers, charms, and healing potions. For those who have struggled with sleep, it is easy to relate to the medieval desire for rest. The simple act of trying to fall asleep in the face of anxiety, pain, or restlessness is something that transcends time. Just as medieval people used whatever tools and rituals they could to facilitate sleep, whether they relied on opiates, bloodletting, or charms, we too turn to modern solutions, often reaching for sleep aids, medications, or comforting rituals that promise to restore our natural rhythms. And yet, like their medieval counterparts, many modern solutions fail to offer the lasting relief we seek. Medications can have side effects, herbal remedies can be ineffective, and no matter how many methods we try, the root causes of sleeplessness often remain unresolved. The emotional toll of insomnia is another connection between medieval and modern struggles. Medieval people often viewed sleeplessness as a reflection of moral or spiritual failure, and this belief brought about feelings of shame and fear. Today, while the spiritual lens has largely faded, the emotional burden of insomnia remains significant. The frustration and anxiety of lying awake at night, feeling helpless and unable to rest, is a familiar experience. The fear of the unknown, the worry that sleeplessness may be linked to deeper health issues, and the nagging sense of isolation all contribute to the modern struggle with sleep. It is no coincidence that anxiety and depression are often linked to sleep disorders today, just as the medieval mind saw insomnia as a manifestation of spiritual unrest. The medieval approach to sleep was also one of dependence on external forces, whether those forces were herbal remedies, magical rituals, or religious prayers. People sought answers outside themselves, hoping that a charm, a prayer, or a potion would provide the relief they so desperately needed. Similarly, in our modern age, we often look to external solutions, medications, apps, relaxation techniques, and even sleep consultants. While these methods may offer temporary relief, the underlying issue, the need for a deeper, holistic understanding of sleep and health, remains unresolved for many. Even as modern science has illuminated the mysteries of sleep, decoding the stages of sleep, identifying sleep cycles, and offering solutions to sleep disorders, we still grapple with the same fundamental questions that medieval people faced. how can we achieve true rest? How can we find peace in the face of anxiety, stress, and the pressures of daily life? The human need for sleep, for a true sense of rest and rejuvenation, remains a universal struggle. One area where the modern world echoes medieval struggles is the environment of sleep. In medieval times, the physical space for sleeping was often cramped, uncomfortable, and subject to external dangers, cold air, vermin, or the presence of family members. Today, while the quality of beds and the comfort of sleep environments have improved drastically, many people still struggle with the physical conditions of sleep. The temperature of the room, the comfort of the mattress, the distractions of light and noise. These are still significant factors that affect our ability to rest. The rituals surrounding sleep have also changed little over the centuries. Just as medieval people created protective amulets or recited prayers before bed, many modern individuals use rituals to help ease into sleep, whether it's reading a book, listening to calming music, or engaging in breathing exercises. These rituals are a way to signal to the body that it is time for rest, helping to transition from the waking world into the world of sleep. The reliance on such rituals speaks to the ongoing need for comfort and control in a world where sleep often feels elusive. Even in the age of advanced medical technology, sleep remains a deeply personal and often elusive experience. The struggle for peaceful sleep, whether it is due to physical discomfort, emotional turmoil, or the pervasive stress of modern life, continues to echo the experiences of those in the medieval period. The methods may have evolved, but the core desire remains unchanged: the need for rest, peace, and restoration. As you lie in bed, reflecting on the medieval struggles for sleep, you realize that, though we have advanced in our understanding of sleep and its importance, many of the same fears, anxieties, and frustrations remain. The search for restful sleep continues to be one of the most universal human experiences, transcending time and place. Whether in a medieval cottage or a modern home, the quest for peace in the darkness of the night remains as relevant as ever, and perhaps, in our shared struggle, there is a timeless bond between the past and the present.